That proposal included garaging for the residents in this area here. Unrelated really to this application, but there is a link, is one of these garages is not used in connection with the barn conversions. That's the subject of a separate planning application. And in order to provide adequate parking for residents, this area has effectively been created for residents parking and visitors. So that's looking back across at the farm buildings that have been converted and the garage, and you can see the area of hard standing in the foreground here. Again, that's just a different view looking at the hard standing area. The application site doesn't go right to that hedgerow boundary. It does stop roughly where you can see the end of the chippings and hard standing. And that's looking back the other way. So I say the application site, as defined in the application plans, stops roughly in this location here. That's just now looking with the complex of buildings behind the photographer, looking across the fields. So this is stood on the edge of the hard standing, looking out across the fields, I think in a generally southerly direction. And there is obviously some equestrian use of the fields adjacent to the site. You can see here from the menage and the grazing of horses. Again, just looking across the site there. Oh, actually, these have gone out of order? Ah, no, sorry, that's just the business you saw at the beginning of the lane in the distance there. So, Chairman, the application relates to this area of land which is outlined in red. Just a correction to make in the report. Paragraph 1 refers to the site as being 693 square metres. Previously, the whole of this area was outlined in red, but effectively the hard standing area, which planning permission is sought for, relates to this area here, which is an area of 11 metres by 21 metres, giving around about 231 square metres. The site, Chairman, is in the green belt. So one of the main considerations here is green belt policy, and in particular paragraphs within the NPPF which relates to development within the green belt. Some development, or most development, is classified as inappropriate development in the green belt. Paragraph 145 details where buildings may not be inappropriate. Double negative, apologies, but that's the correct terminology to use. Paragraph 146 talks about other types of development which are not inappropriate. That can include changes of uses of land and engineering operations where the development does not have an adverse impact on the openness of the green belt. Clearly, in this instance, the laying of a hard standing is an engineering operation, so your officers are satisfied that it falls within that classification of exceptions to inappropriate development. As a sort of a hard standing, it has little impact on the openness of the green belt and the purpose of the green belt. Clearly, when cars are parked there, it has a greater impact, but those are temporary moving structures, so clearly do not have significant or irreparable harm to the openness of the green belt. Having considered it carefully, Chairman, your officers are satisfied that this is not inappropriate development. There is no need to demonstrate very special circumstances in this instance, and the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
We have two speakers to this first application. The first one is a Mr. Warren Brown, please. You step forward to the seat there. When you're ready to begin, if you just press the right-hand side button, after which you have 5 minutes, and we are very strict on the timing. Thank you. When you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to committee and to represent my clients. Firstly, we must commend the planning officer's recommendation for approval. It is thorough, properly balanced, and reflects the careful consideration of the application that has taken place. The application is to regulise the use of land for parking. The parking area is small in scale and measures approximately 0.074 hectares. There is no built development as part of the scheme, and there is no extension of the existing hard standing area. The application area is part of a former winter menage that was constructed approximately 15 years ago, and since has been used as overflow car parking for horse trailers, cars, visitors. Wooden bark chipping is still visible on the site, as evidenced by supporting photos submitted within the planning application. The main consideration highlighted in the planning statements and the planning officer's committee report is whether the development constitutes inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. The car park results in a fairly minor incursion into the adjacent paddock, and it's not considered that the car park results in significant encroachment into the countryside. It is not considered that the proposals conflict with the purposes of the Greenbelt set out in paragraph 134 of the MPPF. The parking has been used for 15 years and thus has been beneficial for vehicles and occupants of residential properties at Kilgraney Farm. This includes parking the land by the occupants of Manor House, Manor Cottage and Broadgate House, the former stables, and visitors to the farm, and oversized vehicles turning to the narrow access road into Kilgraney Farm. It also provides crucial turning space needed for manoeuvring horse boxes, trailers and large delivery vehicles. Following the statutory 28-day consultation period, there were no objections from any consultees during the process of the application. Notably, Highways states that the parking area is associated with the existing permitted development at the site and therefore not resulting in any additional impact on the public highway. There were a total of 20 neighbouring comments in support of the application and 3 comments of objections. With regards to concerns raised, to clarify, the parking area is only at the front of the site, extending to 11 metres. Fencing is not proposed, so not to enclose the site, contrary to the Greenbelt objectives. This is not being raised previously. No lighting is proposed, and it won't prejudice permitted stables development. Overall, the development is small in scale. The development is not considered inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and adheres to both local and national planning policy. The development has been established for 15 years and is beneficial to both the applicant and the wider area. We would therefore kindly request that the committee supports the officer's recommendation for the parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If you just press that button again, it will go off. Thank you. We do have another speaker for this one, Mr. Deacon, who is a neighbour. Let's step forward. Thank you.
Right hand one.
Right hand button, yes, sorry.
My name is Jerry Deacon and I'm representing all the neighbours who object to this planning application and whose properties border directly onto this parking area. In addition, I owned the land in question until it was transferred to the applicant in December 2011, and I am crystal clear about its usage. 8 years ago, the application area was a field surrounded by mature hedges and trees, and for 20 years it had been used as a grazing area for horses and winter turnout. 7 years ago, in 2012, without any planning permission, the hedgerow and boundary trees were dug up and tons of waste concrete and rubble were tipped onto the field and spread out. And you should be able to see photos on the screen from January 2012. The applicant declared that this parking area was purely for temporary use by builders whilst the construction of the stable conversions were taking place and was intended to be returned to Greenbelt Field afterwards. This never happened. Complaints were made to the council about this unauthorised car park with extensive photos and documents, etc. And it's taken years to finally get it to today when a retrospective application has finally been submitted. We asked the committee to refuse this application for 5 reasons. Firstly, it has been developed unlawfully without any regard to consultation or planning permission. 2, it replaces hedges, trees and field with a concrete and rubble car park that impacts on the appearance and landscape of the area. And together with the visual impact of the vehicles, this amounts to inappropriate development of the greenbelt, which should only be granted in very special circumstances. 3. This car park for 8 vehicles would increase the applicant's total parking provision to 26 vehicles, which is massively unnecessary and more suitable for a shopping complex than a tiny rural hamlet of 6 houses. The consequences of this car park would be an increase in traffic dangers for horse riders, children and visitors. And the 5th point, the applicant already has permission for a different land use on exactly the same area of land. In February 2019, this committee had approved and the landscaping conditions for the applicant's stable block, storage and parking area were approved. In it, this area was designated as a paddock for the new stable block with reinstated hedges and planting lists of trees. It is physically impossible for both permissions to be achieved without breach of conditions. Approving a second application today would create a conflict that would invalidate one or either planning permissions. As the planning officer states in the report, this application creates a potential conflict, he carries on, in the event that planning permission is granted for the retention of the car park, it would not be possible to implement the permission for the stable block as approved. Legally, this is known as the Pilkington problem, judged by Lord Scarman and Lord Hobhouse. These are the 5 reasons why we ask this committee to reject this application and to order that the car park is removed and that the area is returned to its original condition of field, hedge and trees that existed 7 years ago. If after consideration you choose to approve this retrospective application, we ask the committee to attach 3 conditions. The first condition is that the parking area is enclosed by a fence on all 4 sides with 1 entrance gate according to their block plan not greater than 6 metres wide. This will provide greater protection for horse riders, children and visitors, and it will also prevent the spread or further development of this unfenced area. And we also ask that this fencing should be undertaken before the car park is allowed to be used. The second condition that we would ask of you would be that the parking area is hedged and landscaped on all 4 sides as before, when the field was screened from the drive by a mature native hedge. Again, there are photographs, so that it is visually not able to be seen effectively from the neighbouring houses. The third condition is one that clearly prevents the development and construction of both this parking area and the previous overlapping planning permission for the stable block, storage and another parking area that was granted earlier this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we've heard 2 speakers for this one. This application and support why the hard standing is required and necessary, and it spoke of the appropriateness of it being in the green belt. However, the objector is mainly concerned about the impact on the visual appearance, amongst other things, and the traffic implications. And I'll ask Mr. Pegram to speak to this one, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points to make, mostly in response to Mr. Deacon's comments. He listed 5 reasons why permission should be refused. First one was that the developments have been carried out unlawfully. Firstly, Chairman, I'd like to confirm for members, you will be aware that development which is carried out without planning permission is not unlawful. There are some exceptions, such as demolishing a listed building or chopping down a protected tree, but ultimately, development which is carried out without planning permission is unauthorised, not unlawful. Furthermore, Chairman, you would not refuse permission. Clearly, we do not condone where someone does something without planning permission, but you would not refuse planning permission on the basis that it's retrospective. The planning permission is quite clear in the guidance. The planning system should not be used punitively, so the application has to be considered on its merits. as if the development hadn't taken place. So it's not an easy ride because it has taken place. It has to be considered on its merits. Suggestion that the site should be cleared and replaced with hedgerows, and that the car park has a detrimental impact on the character of the area. Clearly, members will have to judge that for their own, for themselves as the decision makers. There was a suggestion from Mr. Deacon that this is inappropriate development. As I said when I introduced the item, your officers have considered this and are satisfied that it is not inappropriate development and is therefore no need to demonstrate very special circumstances. Comment that the proposal increases the number of parking spaces to 26. That's the area, Chairman. You can see that, Vice Chairman, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe get another 2 in there. I would dispute whether that area would generate parking and level of parking, parking of vehicles that was suggested. On the issue of traffic hazards, favourite saying, Chairman, the Highway Authority don't object. Their view is that this doesn't generate any additional traffic over and above what would be generated by the residential use that uses that area. The permission that was referred to for the stable blocks, Chairman, just to clarify, my understanding is that that permission was granted in 2013. It's number 6 on paragraph 6 on page 29. There is and then there was a discharge of condition. Sorry, there's another one granted in 2016, a renewal effectively. That permission had a 3-year time limit on it. So would have effectively expired in February of this year. There is a debate or discussion going on between the applicant's agents and ourselves as to whether development has commenced, which would then effectively keep that permission alive. But at the moment, Chairman, your officer's view is that that permission has not yet been commenced, and it's for the applicant to demonstrate that it has. In any event, Chairman, as we've seen previously in this chamber, we can grant different permissions for a site, and it's then up to the owner of the site, the applicant, to decide which permission they implement. Yes, there would be implications here for the permission that's granted at the back. My reading of the plans is effectively the access road to the stable development would come down through here, roughly, so there is clearly a potential conflict between the two plans. If members were minded to approve this, and it then that does have implications for that layout, that's for the applicant to come back and resolve with the planning authority. But it doesn't, that previous permission doesn't preclude you considering or granting planning permission for a different type of development. 3 suggested conditions, Chairman. One was that the area should be fenced to prevent further encroachment effectively. Clearly, you heard your officer's views at the moment. We don't believe this does impact on the openness. If you were to fence it, it would have a greater impact. Having said that, the applicant could erect a fence under permitted development. There's nothing in the conditions to prevent that. So you can erect fences around fields and that type of thing without permission. Also, it suggested it should be hedged on all 4 sides. Again, we haven't deemed that necessary as part of the conditions. And the other one was that a condition should be imposed on this permission, preventing the implementation of the other permission. Again, Chairman, the guidance, I think, is still up to date on this issue. You should not effectively take away permission by condition of a planning permission. If there is a need to prevent a permission being implemented, there is a process of voluntary revocation, and that would be the correct process to go through. But as I say, if this permission were granted, then clearly the applicant would have to discuss and resolve issues of any potential conflict between the 2 applications. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak from the committee? Councillor Thomas, go first.
Yes, there seem to be 2 aspects to this. One is whether or not it's appropriate development in the green belt, and the other is the design of the area. I think there's definitely some harm to the openness of the site and to the green belt. So I think there's some question as to whether or not this is appropriate development. As far as the design is concerned, Mr. Bedram's just told us that we have to consider it as if it hadn't taken place, as if the development hadn't taken place. And I think if we were looking at a new application for a car park, we would be looking for details like construction materials, boundary treatments, drainage, perhaps lighting, and the entrance and the design of those things. And that's that's not present on this application. As far as going back to the greenbelt issue, as far as the appropriate, whether or not it's appropriate, and whether or not there are special circumstances to make it appropriate, I think has there been some change of use in the area that would need extra parking? I don't think it's been shown that there is extra need for parking. And I would also question the person speaking for the application said that they've been parking here for 15 years, and if that's the case, I don't understand why we have the application in front of us, because after 10 years it would become permitted, as I understand it. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
No
Any?
comment, thank you.
No comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask on a point of clarity if the use is largely commercial or residential? I'm assuming commercial. And I would echo a lot of the points that Councillor Thomas made. I mean, it does look to me unsightly at best, and it may not be technically an incursion into the green belt that causes harm, but it certainly isn't an asset or improving the visual aspect of the green belt area. I can't understand why we would not be willing to agree some kind of... Sorry, that's extremely distracting.
Thank you. Could you all make sure you haven't got your mobiles on anything but silence, please?
That some kind of boundary treatment along the side of the road would at least minimise the potential visible impact of that space on the residential properties at the side of it. So it seems to me, if this is not an inappropriate development in the greenbelt, which would be my inclination, it is not an attractive one or one that brings any benefit to it, and therefore some form of rebuilding of the hedgerows or some sort of screening along there would seem to me a reasonable condition to apply. Thank you.
Chairman, I think there was just one question there about whether it's commercial or residential. My understanding is it's predominantly for the residents that live opposite the car parking area.
Thank you. Councillor Gowland, please.
Just like to second that. I'd quite like to see a screening, a hedgerow screening around this. Is that can be made a condition?
Are there any further speakers? Would someone like to propose a recommendation? And, if you wish to add any condition.
Well, I'd like to propose that we approve it, but with the condition of appropriate screening along the roadside. Thank you.
Could I just ask you, Mr. Pegram, if that is acceptable as a condition?
Yeah, if I can just clarify, Chairman, so that we're clear about what we're talking about. You use the word screening and also planting. Is it landscaping, hedgerow that you want, and is it predominantly just along that roadside? But, yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Have you a seconder, please? Thank you. Councillor Major, second. Do you wish to add anything further? Thank you. Okay, with those conditions on page 34, conditions 1 and 2, and the third one about hedge screening, it's proposed that planning permission be granted. All those in favour, please show. Against? Thank you. No abstentions. That motion is carried. Thank you. We'll just have a slight pause while people depart. Thank you. The next application this evening is on page 37, 19/0010901, 1 Baker's Close Cotgrave, single-storey rear and side extension. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you. Yes, the application relates to 1 Baker's Close. You can see from the map or the plan on the screen that basically this is the property in question, bordered on 3 sides by roads. The front of the property faces Baker's Close, and the rear faces out onto the main thoroughfare here. Just the aerial photography confirming that location with the road running through and the application site there indicated on the screen. Sorry, just a little bit closer in. So the application is for a single-storey extension on the rear of this property. That's the property in question, with looking at the front elevation from within the development. Moving around, you can see there is a change in level between the garden and the main road through. Looking across at the side elevation of the property, so the extension would come out through here. It would project 3.6 metres from the rear elevation of the property. That's looking again, slightly different angle, and as we move around, you can view it across there as well. You can see there's a hedgerow providing a nice screen. And that's the details of the extension. Single storey, flat roofed with some roof lights in the top. That's the property as existing as you've seen it in the photographs. And then that is the proposal. So again, you can see the extension projecting 3.6 metres out there. That's the rear elevation, 2 sets of doors with roof lights in the top. Chairman, this is a relatively modest addition. Doesn't impact adversely on any of the neighbours. Relatively low level, and the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. We have no speakers to this one, so members of the committee, any comments to make, please? Want to go straight to the recommendation then? Would someone like to recommend it? Councillor Perdue-Horan, any comments made? And seconder? Thank you. Councillor Baker. Right, we'll go straight to the recommendation, which is on page 41, with 3 conditions. All those in favour of granting planning permission, please show. That is, thank you, unanimous.
Right, thank you very much for that. We'll go on to our next application now, which is land at Manor Park, Ruddington, erection of 43 retirement apartments for older people, guest apartments, communal facilities, access, car parking and landscaping. Mr. Pegram. Yes, we're just finding papers.
Thank you, Chairman. There was a late representations circulated to members yesterday. Members will note on the first one there was a query about a condition raised by the applicant. In particular, Chairman, this relates to condition 3, where we are seeking to limit the age group of the development here. The condition 3 on page 61 specifies that each unit of the development hereby permitted shall be occupied only by persons of state pensionable age, and then there's some other clarification in there as well. Chairman, since we wrote this report, and only in fact today, we've had an appeal decision back on a similar development in West Bridgford by the same applicant, in fact, where the nature of that type of condition was debated through the hearing in this very chamber. The change that occurred, Chairman, as a result of that appeal is that the inspector did not think that the suggested wording that we put forward, i.e. state pensionable age, was precise enough. And obviously one of the tests of conditions is they have to be precise. And therefore he has changed the condition on the latest appeal that was allowed to refer to people aged 60 years of age. So the suggestion, Chairman, if members were minded to grant planning permission, is that there's a further change to condition 3, basically to say each unit of development hereby permitted shall be occupied only by persons over the age of 60. The other two criteria, B and C, would remain unchanged. I'll move into the presentation now, Chairman. The application relates to an area on Manor Park. Manor Park is actually, all these roads that I'm indicating are private roads, so they're not adopted by the Highway Authority. The adopted highway is obviously the main road running through here, north-south. That's the application site. It is within the conservation area. Neighbouring property is a listed building. The church is also listed amongst other ones in the general area. That's the aerial photography. You can see that there's an area of quite dense tree cover to the rear and side. The plans indicate that that area is within the control of the applicant, but does not form part of the application site. This is looking along Manor Park back towards the main road, so the application site is on the right here. The land within the site is at a higher level than the pavement and the road here, so there's a slight incline up into the site. Front boundary wall obviously is more of a retaining wall defining the front boundary of the site. That's looking back the other way, so again this is the access into the site. There was previously a building, a care home I think it was, that occupied this site. You'll see from the photographs that that has now been demolished. So that's now stood within the site looking out onto Manor Park. Again, slightly different angle, and you can pick up the property on the opposite side of the road now. You can see, just probably see from that, that there is some Tudor timber detailing on the front of that building. That's looking at the other property the other way, so this is actually on the same side of the road as the application site, and the rear wall of this property is effectively the boundary with the application site. Two windows in here, Chairman, you can see, which we deduced from our plans that we hold in the office, that one is probably a bathroom window, other potentially a study or bedroom window. And again, you can see those are ground floor windows, so you can see the difference in level between the site and that property. That's looking across the site now. I'll just get my bearings, Chairman, bear with me. So that's now looking in a generally westerly direction. I lost my glasses now. There they are. Generally westerly direction, that's towards South Manor. And you see that property that was in the foreground there, the one we just looked at. That's a closer view of the neighbouring property. Again, moving around now, looking towards the rear, coming round towards the rear of the site. Again, stood on the other side of the site now, looking back out across the road at that property I highlighted earlier. Stood towards the back of the site again, looking in that similar direction towards that property on the opposite side of the road. And then looking towards the back of the site where you can see the trees and natural growth. This is on the edge of the woodland. You can see that it does drop away at the back here to a lower level. And then again, just looking at that adjacent woodland area. This is looking, Chairman, towards the property to the east, Coppertop, and you can see their boundary fence in there. And again, similar direction. And then generally across the site, looking in a sort of southeasterly direction, and you can then pick up the spire of the Church of St. Peter. So the application site is the area which is shaded red. It does include up to the middle of the road. Obviously, as I say, it is a private road through here. And the proposal, as I said, is for a retirement complex of 43 apartments. It's a 3-storey building adopting a more traditional approach. Permission was previously granted on this site for a 3-storey building providing 40 apartments. You can't see it very clearly on here, but the footprint of that building is marked out. So in Blue Peter style, I prepared this one earlier, which shows more clearly the footprint of what was approved previously. That permission has now lapsed, but that area that I'm indicating was the footprint of the approved building. So the proposed building sits in a very similar position and of a similar shape and style to that previous approval. The main difference, Chairman, is that, as I said, this now adopts a more traditional approach with a pitched roof as opposed to a flat roof. The accommodation would be arranged over 3 floors, as you can see here, with a pitched roof. That gives you a feel for the sort of context of the area, and you can see the spire to St. Peter's Church in the background there. The accommodation is predominantly 1-bedroom units, some 2-bedroom units, so you can see that the red or pink ones, however it appears on screen, are the 1-bedroom units. The yellowy mustard coloured ones are the 2-bedroom units, and the blue areas are communal areas. And a similar sort of layout as you go up through the building. That's the that may still be, bear with me, that's the ground floor, first floor, second floor. So you can see the layout goes up through the building thus. That's the roof plan. There are some areas of flat roof to help articulate the building and break up the mass. And that is the proposed design. So again, it picks up on that sort of Tudor theme that is present in the area. There's some areas of flat roof. This obviously is recessed to give an articulation, so these blocks sit forward of that area. So it's typically a U-shaped block. That's the elevation which faces Coppertop, so that's the east elevation. That's the rear elevation facing the woodland area. And that's the west elevation facing South Manor. And this one just gives you the effectively a cut through of that feature at the front, so the blocks project forward of that central entrance area. Just to give you a flavour of what was approved previously, Chairman, this, as I say, was the footprint of the previous development, very similar to what you're considering this evening, but that did adopt a more contemporary flat-roofed approach. Whether you like it or not, I often describe it as Marmite, so either you like it or you don't. It's considered, Chairman, that the current scheme is or more of a pastiche, but is actually more in keeping and more sympathetic to the character and appearance of the area. Chairman, there are, as I said at the beginning, we are in the conservation area. There are listed buildings nearby, so I have to remind you of the statutory duty under section 66 and 72 of the Listed Building Conservation Areas Act. That specifically in terms of conservation areas, section 72 requires you give special regard to the character and appearance of the area and the desirability for preserving or enhancing that character and appearance. In terms of section 66, the issue there is that we have to have regard for the impact of the development on the setting of any nearby listed buildings. Chairman, there is a little bit of conflict in the report. You have on page 47, going over to 48 and on to 49, the advice from your conservation officer. He deemed that the scheme did not cause harm to the appearance of the conservation area or the setting of listed buildings. In applying the planning balance, the case officer has deemed that there may be slight harm, which we in sort of terms of the NPPF would call less than substantial harm. You either have no harm, significant harm or less than substantial. And that less than substantial range is a significant range from pretty much just above no harm to significant harm. In this instance, Chairman, the case officer has suggested that there may be slight harm. The policy requirement then is that you balance that harm against the public benefits of the scheme. And those are set out in the report for you, which basically on page 60, which is suggested that the benefits are bringing back into use a site which is currently unsightly, and also providing a type of accommodation where there is a demand in the borough and the area for that type of accommodation, providing a mix of housing type. Chairman, I'll stop there and pass over to you. The application is recommended that the Executive Manager of Communities is authorised to grant planning permission prior to the subject to the prior signing of a Section 106 agreement. That Section 106 agreement would cover a contribution towards affordable housing as detailed in paragraph 85, and also a contribution towards the Nottingham University Hospital Trust for impact on services at the hospital. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. We have 3 speakers on this item from the public. The first is Mr. Shellham, who is the applicant's agent. If you're here, please. And the way it works, you have up to 5 minutes to talk to us, and this will count down to 0, and it's a one-way, not a discussion, one-way presentation. So as soon as you're ready, press the right button.
Ladies and gentlemen, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. The applicant has engaged with officers, consultees and the community throughout this application. I'm pleased with their assistance is before you with a recommendation for approval. The delivery of older persons accommodation is identified as critical by government, and the proposed scheme provides the opportunity to provide a high quality scheme for older residents of the borough on a sustainable and available previously developed site. The proposed scheme has had regard to the character of Manor Park and the Redenston Conservation Area, and to the planning history of the site. The site previously been consented for a 3-storey care home of 40 units of modern design. The applicant has considered that a more vernacular design approach and materials will be more sympathetic in keeping with the conservation area and the nearby buildings than a contemporary design. The building, as acknowledged by your officers, is of the same height, footprint and scale to the care home building previously approved by the council. There is a county council covenant to the rear of the site preventing development, so it's not possible to set the building further back. Indeed, from a design perspective and the established building line, we consider the siting to be appropriate. I would draw your attention to the Conservation Officer's conclusion that the scheme as proposed would achieve the standard of good design advocated by the NPPF and would not harm either the settings of nearby listed buildings or the character and appearance of the Redenston Conservation Area. The proposal is a needs-based form of accommodation, and by that I mean occupants only move to specialist older persons accommodation when they need to. This is reflected in the average age of residents on first occupation being 79 years of age, and more often than not, single-person occupancy of the apartment. There are 3 main drivers to the move to retirement accommodation. 1, the current family home has become too much to manage and cope with. 2, loss of a partner or spouse. And 3, the need to give up a private car. The nature and characteristics of residents reflects in a lower level car ownership in use, and church regularly monitor and survey their lodges to ensure there is sufficient parking for residents, staff and visitors. A typical level of parking provision is 1 space per 3 apartments, but we have increased that to 1 space per 2 apartments with the proposed scheme. We observed Manor Park Road and surroundings during school pick-up and drop-off times and found there still to be on-street parking available, although it should be stated residents of retirement schemes owning a car tend to choose to travel outside of rush hours. I would note the survey evidence from the applicant's existing schemes have been presented to officers, and the Highway Authority have concluded the parking levels are acceptable and represent no harm to highway safety. Churchill Retirement Living also signed up to the Considerate Developer Scheme in respect to construction management plans, and I'll draw your attention to Condition 8, which controls construction management plans and also restricts hours of delivery and vehicular movements. The applicant has met and listened to comments from Manor Park Residents Association and has proposed to change the scheme to include a new hedge behind the existing wall on Manor Park Road and semi-mature planting to the boundary with copper tops should the applicant receive consent for the proposed scheme. it would resurface the pedestrian footpath up to the adopted highway on the side of the road of the proposed development, and would of course expect to contribute to upkeep of the private road. The need to provide older persons accommodation is identified by national guidance as critical. The recent local plan identifies that older population is projected to increase by 53% by 2034. The number of people over the age of 80 is projected to almost double over the same period, and that is why the local plan states there is a clear need to plan for homes that meet the needs of older people. This form of specialist retirement accommodation has a number of material planning and community benefits which weigh in favour of the scheme. The site is in close proximity to Reddington Centre, which is important to residents of retirement housing schemes who tend to rely on local shops and services. A report undertaken by Orb identified that a scheme of 55 residents generates a spend in local shops of £610,000 per annum, and when compared against conventional housing development. In respect to healthcare, the recent Homes for Later Living report from September this year identifies each person living in a home for later life such as the proposed saves the NHS and social services approximately £3,500 per year. We're also making additional contributions to healthcare infrastructure. To conclude, the proposal is for a redevelopment of a sustainable brownfield site. The proposed scheme follows the footprint and height and scale of the previous care home consent granted by the council, but rather than a contemporary design, the applicant has chosen a more vernacular design that is more sympathetic to the character and appearance of neighbouring buildings in the Reddington Conservation Area, which is supported by officers and conservation officer. It would provide financial contributions towards affordable housing and local healthcare and benefits to the local centre through the residents themselves. National Planning Policy Guidance advises local planning authorities to take a positive approach to retirement housing schemes where there is an identified unmet need. I hope members can support their officers' positive approach to this scheme and approve the proposal.
Okay, thank you. That was just on 5 minutes, so thank you very much for that. We have to be quite, even if you were mid-flow, I'd have to cut you off at 5 minutes, so, but thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Pollock, who is speaking on behalf of the Manor Park Residents Association. If you're here, Mr. Pollock, please. Or maybe it's not Mr. But that's the name I've got here. You don't look like Mr. Pollock.
I'm sorry. I'm
Olivia Stoddart. Right. Oh. Just, can you just, one moment, please? Yes, can I just confirm you are speaking instead of Mr. Pollock, is that right? Yes, okay, it's just for the record, that's all, yes. Sorry, you were going to clarify something or ask something just then? Or?
Yes, may I respectfully ask the committee whether you have read and digested the detailed submissions sent in by the Manor Park Residents Association?
The committee will, well, I'm sure they will confirm, but any material that's sent in before the deadline will have been received and ready. Right, and so I'll just confirm: have we received all the late representations and the? So yes, we have.
No, I understand what I'm receiving. Have you read and digested?
Well, I can't say whether the committee will have read, but knowing how diligent my colleagues are, they are here to do a job, and part of the job is to read letters, reports, and all the rest of it. So they will have received it. So if you'd like to have a sit down and address the committee, and as soon as you're ready, it's the right-hand button and the red light will come on. And hopefully the clock will start counting down as well. When it gets to 0, we have to stop. So just change that there.
My name is Olivia Stoddart, and I'm speaking on behalf of Manor Park Residents Association, who represent the interests of the 35 private dwellings, 1 business and James Peacock Infant School occupying the private road of Manor Park in Ruddington. Here we all are, representing each and every household that care deeply about the issues raised with this application on our conservation area. At the outset, I must draw your attention, as the councillor has already, to the fact that the Manor Park Character Zone is in the Ruddington Conservation Area. It is a heritage asset, and it's protected by various laws, guidance, and precedents to protect its appearance and identity. Contrary to what Mr Shellham has just asserted about consultation with the residents of the road, we managed to get a meeting just 12 days ago after 3 requests dating back to September, and that was after the residents reached out to the developers. We heard nothing voluntarily. Our first objection is around the issue of density. Manor Park has a density of 9 dwellings per hectare. The development will have a density of 148 dwellings per hectare. 9 versus 148, it's a 16-fold increase. It is a 300% increase on the Rushcliffe Residential Design Guide range of 35 to 55 dwellings per hectare. With an occupancy rate of 1.29, that one building will contain almost as many adults as the 35 private houses combined. The scale and mass of this proposed development creates this density, and it's not compatible with the surrounding density of this small private road. Churchill proposed to only develop 0.29 hectares of the 0.89 hectares they were purchasing, less than 1/3. Use of the whole of this plot would reduce the density to 48 dwellings per hectare within the RBC's own guidelines. We urge RBC to reject this application based on over-intensive development. Our second objection relates to massing, scale and proportion. This will be the only fully 3-storey building in Manor Park with its tall eaves. Height is shown as 12 metres, significantly higher than any building in Manor Park, including chimneys. And again, contrary to what Mr Shellham has asserted, we understand it will be higher than the previous application approved. At ridge level, it will be taller than the Grade 2 listed manor and the village church. It will be the tallest and largest building in the village. It will be seen from Wilford Road, which is the adopted highway as you enter Manor Park, changing the character and appearance of Manor Park character zone forever. The Rushcliffe Residential Design Guide states that achieving a compatible scale, massing and layout with the surrounding settlement is a key design objective and influences density. Use of the whole plot would enable the developer to present a scheme with a compatible mass, scale and proportion. We urge RBC to reject this application based on an overbearing scale, massing, layout and on a human level, the miserable provision of recreation outdoor space for the occupants. Our third objection is on the grounds of architectural style and detailing. The previously approved planning application for this plot was for, and we quote, a building of 2 storeys on the overall footprint with a small element of accommodation as a 3rd-storey inset. So just like the largest houses in Manor Park, it was a 2.5-storey included in the roof. The Churchill proposal completely fails to show that same level of understanding. In fact, the giant empty lid of a roof structure adds a massive 4 metres to the height of the building, which makes the scale and massing problem even worse. 34% of the building height is an utterly pointless, vacant and dominating roof structure. Our fourth objection is based on the grounds of privacy. We've outlined that in the detailed situation. Our final objection is to harm of the conservation area. The developer and RBC admit the development will cause slightly less than substantial harm to Manor Park, which is within the conservation area.
Right. We've actually just hit the 5 minutes.
Okay.
And so, as I mentioned...
This is my most significant point. I know you don't want people to go on for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
I would like one further 60 seconds, if I may.
I can't, because I had to give the applicant 5 minutes and I have to give everyone else up to 5 minutes as well. Plus the fact, irrespective of which application we're discussing, it's the rules and policies. Sure. But I would assure you...
May I finish my final sentence at least?
Well, I would assure you that everyone has received, the committee has received your the representations both from you but also other parties as well. I want to assure you of that, even though I've had to cut off your vocal presentation.
There's a concern about the conservation
yes,
officer,
we've got-
single
yes.
sentence, and he left the LBC just days later. It looked like a clearing of the desk.
No, we have got the reports
Okay.
and we've got the comments in favour and against.
So we ask you
Please
for your
believe
careful
me,
considerations
we
of those
do-
objections.
Yes,
Thank you.
I have got that. Thank you. I'd just like to make it. I'm not being deliberately awkward or anything here, but there are very strict rules with regards to planning and judicial and quasi-judicial rules and all the rest of it. So please don't think I'm cutting you off on purpose. It's literally five minutes per speaker or less. Now our third speaker on this is one of the local ward members, Councillor Gaunt, please. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you how to work the microphone. Well, it's on anyway, yes. So as soon as you're ready, up to 5 minutes.
Right, okay, thank you for allowing me to speak. I object to this planning application in its current guise. I agree with the points raised by the residents behind me. When you approach the village from the north, you're confronted by the historic tower of St Peter's Church on the ridge, on which the ancient core of the village was built. The height of this development is totally inappropriate to the location that's being built. The development will be the only three-storey building, as mentioned a minute ago, in the area, and it will stand higher than not only all the surrounding buildings in Manor Park, but also it will stand higher than the roof line of St Peter's Church. This proposal is looking to build one of the highest buildings in the entire village on the highest point in the entire village. This will totally change the character in the conservation area and does cause issues under section 66 and 72 of special regard and more than slight harm, I believe. The ridge on which the property is being built puts ground level of this property, the foot of this property, at the height of the first floor properties opposite on the other side of the street. This means that this three-storey development will tower over neighbouring properties, which will have a very negative impact on this historical section of the village, but also presents issues of overlooking, which is a material planning consideration. Massive questions need to be asked, really, about this development. Does it need locating at the front, where it currently stands, and not at the rear of the site? As you go towards the rear of the site, the land drops away. So the height impact would be reduced by moving this site to the back, not to the back of the little plot that was suggested, but the land that they actually are using. So we need to do that. That would significantly reduce the problem of overlooking and the mass of the scale of the thing. Some other wider points. Highway safety. On 2 occasions, daily, the private road is used by the parents of James Peacock Infant School. It's the only route of access into the school by car. Right? This means the street often becomes gridlocked at peak times. Congestion is a severe issue for the safety of young families walking along the pavements with pushchairs, as the gravel paths that exist along the sides of the street are not really appropriate for children in buggies to be being pushed along. They were never designed for such things, and they were never designed, the roads themselves were never designed for such high levels of traffic. Adding dozens more cars into this would cause major problems. The fourth issue really is parking. It's a major problem. Very few car parks for residents have been given, considering the number of properties and the number of staff. The biggest problem really is going to be visitor car parks. The site will be expected to park in the street. The developers only own 23 metres at the front of that street at the most. The rest of the parking is going to have to be along private streets down the side, along neighbouring streets. As stated before, the streets are already rammed with traffic at peak school hours, and I would disagree with what was said at the start, that isn't a problem. It's a major problem in that street. The fifth criteria I'd like to challenge is disabled access. It's a major issue, especially with regard to this development, as this is for elderly residents. The current layout of the local streets are such that there is no current street lighting. It's pitch black at 3 o'clock in the evening at the moment, and there's no street lights on that street. My wife stores a business van on that street, and it's impossible. You can't see where you're going at night. Also, the paths at the moment, the pavements are gravel, because obviously it's private streets, not adopted. This will present a major issue, as it's the only available route into the village for the residents who are going to live there. Finally, really, we're talking about traffic on the actual street. Well, traffic not just into the Manor Park is going to be a problem at school times, with it becoming impassable, but also we're talking about going out of Manor Park. this road opens out and goes on to Wilford Road. Now, Wilford Road is the only north-south road through Runnington. I've mentioned this before at previous planning applications. The only route between the north and the south of the village is a one-lane road across the ridge. Right? If Manor Park have to come out onto that road, so that road is already chock-a-block at peak times at rush hour. You can't get through the village very easily. It's a problem, the major issue for the village. These cars will be coming out onto that street. So we're talking 20, 30, maybe 40 cars extra because of the people who are going to live there. Elderly people these days are driving. They're not people who are infirm and unable to look at themselves. They're independent people who will be driving. A lot of them, there's an expectation that they're going to be living, Ruddington old folk. They're probably going to be people from all around the area who are retiring here, and they're going to have residents and visitors joining them all the time. So I've got to take care of them. I'm running out of time. Sorry, so funny. The residents aren't against this development. I want to get that clear. They're against its current guise. It's too tall. It's too imposing. There's not enough traffic. There's not enough parking. Sorry, there's too much traffic. Blah 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 blah. Thank you.
Would you just turn the thing off, please? Thank you. Right, we heard very clearly from everybody, so thank you very much for that. It's not an easy thing to sit there and talk to us, but we heard from Mr. Shelburne, who is speaking on behalf of the applicant, and explained why, in his view, the application should be allowed. Pointed out matters such as identified critical need for this sort of accommodation in various areas. Pointed out, from his point of view, the sustainability and the character of the application, and referred to the previously approved application as being the same height, and also told us about the average age of the residents. Mrs. Stothard was against the application, telling us about the impact on Manor Park itself, but also the density of compared to the existing properties on Manor Park, and worried about traffic and impact on the school parking as well, and also design and style. And Councillor Gaunt also objects and referred to the height of the application compared to the church in particular, considers it too high, and says the previous application was 2.5 stories as opposed to 3 stories, and he feels that it would tower over neighbouring and other properties, and also referred to traffic, highway safety and Wilford Road. I think that's covered everything. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few points to pick up on there. Chairman, the applicant, I think you referred to it, applicant's agent referred to the development as being similar or same height as what was approved previously. That is what was approved previously. It is 3-storey, not 2-storey, but obviously 2.5-storey, but it does have a flat roof, so you don't have the added height of the roof structure. I scaled this afternoon, and I scaled that at around about 9.5 to 9.6 metres to the highest flat roof, the level I'm indicating there on the screen. If I now go back to the other plan, in contrast, Chairman, the proposal before you this evening, to that roof height there, is around about 12.2 metres. So clearly, just to correct that, there is it is a bit higher than what was previously approved. First time I've got applause from the objectors, Chairman. Thank you. Chairman, oh, he's thrown me now. Yes. Right.
Don't get too used to it.
No. So just to clarify that point, there was also, Chairman, I should have corrected at the beginning, the paragraph 1 of the report describes the site as having an area of 0.89 hectares. I think that relates to the overall area of the site, but the bit that's developable, or the bit I showed you that was outlined in red, is around about 0.32 hectares. Twice in one night. There was an analogy made about density, Chairman, compared with the existing character of the area. Here, I think I won't get an applause. The issue, Chairman, here is that, yes, we do have design guide levels for traditional type housing development. However, Chairman, flatted development or apartment development does, by its very nature, result in a higher density per hectare. That is a fact, obviously. So, as I say, I wouldn't get too hung up on dwellings per hectare density. There was a suggestion that the building floor, the ground floor level, would be level with the first floor of the properties on the opposite side of the road. Yes, the site is elevated above the road. I doubt it is elevated to that extent that the ground floor level would be of a similar height to first floor on the properties opposite. The other point I'd make, Chairman, although the previous permission has lapsed, I think it's one that you should give some weight to in the planning balance. That was a scheme for 40 apartments on a same-size site, basically. I think you've heard from the applicant that the reason they can't push the building further back is because there is a covenant on the land at the rear. Clearly, we always advise you, Chairman, that covenants are not a planning matter. Even if the building was in that area which is subject to the covenant, this authority still has to consider that application. However, Chairman, just to remind members that we did give permission previously for a building of a similar shape, similar footprint in a similar location. The other issue is, Chairman, that clearly pushing it back may have greater impact on trees to the rear of the site that you saw in the photographs. Yes, the building is higher by virtue of its roof. I do dispute, I'm not sure, Chairman, you can't see the roof of the church, but in that picture I showed you, there is obviously an indication of the spire height of the church in the background, so members must judge that for themselves. Concern was also raised that it was overbearing. Again, that's a matter for members to consider. One significant point that I should mention, Chairman, that was mentioned by the objector and by Councillor Gaunt, is that the site is in the conservation area, and I would reiterate, because the site is in the conservation area, it's not a policy requirement. You have a statutory duty to consider the impact of the development on the area. You have to give significant weight to any impact on the character of the conservation area. As I say, Chairman, your conservation officer considered this proposal and did not consider that the proposal would result in harm to either the character of the conservation area or the setting of listed buildings. In terms of the comment that Councillor Gaunt made, that is the route back into the village. That does not look like gravel to me, Chairman. It does look like a Tarmacadam path. I will leave members. I will leave members to form their own opinion. They can see the picture in front of them. On that point, Chairman, on one other point, Chairman, just in terms of the parking level, the parking level for this development has been assessed having regard to similar developments elsewhere of this nature, giving rise to, or justifying, if you like, a reduced parking level. The Highway Authority have considered the transport assessment that accompanied this application and are satisfied with the parking level that is proposed. Councillor Gaunt also made reference to impact on highway safety, particularly on Wilford Road. Obviously, Manor Park is a private road where the Highway Authority have limited jurisdiction. I think clearly there is a school at the end of this road, which raises the concern about possible vehicle movements. However, Chairman, the application and its vehicle movements and the transport assessment was considered by the Highway Authority, and the Highway Authority do not object to this application. Their comments set out on page 47 of the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. No. It's. I'm sorry. No. It's. Please. Right. We'll open it up for the committee now to ask. We can get further clarification from within the committee. So, committee members, who would like to start off with discussion and debate on this one, please? So don't be shy. Councillor Thomas, please. As well as discussion and debate, questions as well. I'm sorry, I should have made that clear.
I've got several things I was wanting to say, but could I just clarify the construction material of the pavements in the private area? The documentation does say that it's compacted gravel, and I think that's true. I was just wanting to ask Mr Pegram to confirm what the pavements are made of. And then perhaps I can come back later.
We can check that. We will look into that for you. Yeah. Right. Council.
Other points.
Yes, the other points. Yes. We're just.
Carry on, Jim.
Right.
Do you want me to?
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Councillor
Okay.
Thomas.
I'm very supportive of the principle of this type of development in this location, but there are some issues that I'd like to either be reassured on by Mr Pegram or that can perhaps be dealt with by conditions. The first is the access, the pedestrian access and access for mobility scooters and so on. The previous application did have a footpath through to Vicarage Lane, I think it is, which did seem to provide a much better access into the village centre. Now, Mr Pegram will say we're not looking at the optimum footpath, we're looking at the one that's proposed. My concern with the pedestrian access that's proposed is this pavement in front of us, really, how level it is, what material it's made out of, and the fact that there's no lighting. I would, that's one issue that I would like to be looked at. As far as impact on the residential amenity of neighbours is concerned, I think there are concerns for the neighbours in Hunter's Cottage, and there's two conditions that are covering, as far as I can see, that are covering the impact of the buggy room and the plant room. But I'm also noted a comment from the resident about the impact of the parking spaces directly underneath the windows, and I haven't seen that has been addressed anywhere.
One thing on there is bearing in mind it's a private road. The Highways Authority doesn't have any jurisdiction on what can or can't happen on what is a private road, even though it's a public access. It's a private road. It's not a local authority road. Just need to bear that in mind.
My concern is for the access, the pedestrian access to it, whoever owns it, really. But yeah, I understand that. What else have I got? The health centre, the health contribution that's been stated is for the hospitals, and I was wondering if there would be a health contribution for the health centre and whether that would be covered in the section 106. I think that's it for now anyway. Might come back, that's all right.
Right, so to confirm, you're worried about the pedestrian access, because on the one hand, residents will want to visit Ruddington on foot, and you're worried about the safety for them walking along Manor Park into Ruddington that way, as opposed to possibly going by a different way via Vicarage Lane, for example. That's your main worry on the access side of things, isn't it? So we're just looking.
Carry on,
yeah, shall we carry on? So we are getting answers on those. Right. Did I see another hand go up?
Yes,
Councillor Major.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that point, I don't think there are details of the section 106, and if there are, apologies, I've missed that. It seems to me that while they've generous donations towards the off-site provision of affordable housing and towards the Nottingham University Hospitals Trust, I would imagine those aren't mandatory on the developer. Could we not redirect some of, or an additional sum to support that kind of the access route? If it is a private road and it needs to be funded privately, is that not something that the developer could contribute towards to kind of ease some of the burden on the local area, improving the pavements, and sort of upgrading the lighting? If that's, I mean, there's a bit of a contradiction. People don't want lighting because it's too much lighting, but I think if we're looking at the safety of the residents, not just the new ones, but the existing ones, perhaps a contribution towards that might be more appropriate, if that's something we can.
Frantic turning of pages again. I think I'll wait for clarification, but because it's a private road, any repairs or maintenance of a private road is usually the responsibility of usually the frontages and buildings on that road, I think. So that I mean, I'll wait for confirmation from the professionals, but we need to keep that in mind.
Doesn't someone have to coordinate that operation? And they could
well, on a private road, it would be the people who own or face and front the private road. I think
they would be.
But that's just me as my understanding. I might be wrong, but. And was there something else you wanted to come in on? No, okay. Mr. Pegram.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I won't reiterate your point. You're quite correct. The matter of maintenance of that road, well, I'm repeating it now, is a matter for the frontages of that road. It's a private road. Clearly, the developer may have a right of access over that road. It may be specified in some covenant what that right of access relates to and services. It may be that they need to seek to vary that covenant and that requirement as a contributor to any maintenance of the road. But that would be, as I say, I raise those issues purely because we get this all the time with planning quite regularly on planning applications. It's not for this committee to consider that point. It is a private matter between the owners of that road. In terms of the question about contributions to upkeep of that towards the upkeep of that road, again, principally because it's a private road, developer would still have a responsibility to do that in any case, as would all the other residents.
Can I just come in on that? Would that because the developer or the owner of this site is on that road in effect, would they have a similar sort of responsibility to residents and houses on that road then? Do they in effect become part of the owner of that road? So
yes,
therefore,
that would be my understanding, Chairman, but it would be a matter between the Residents Association and the residents who live on that road to apportion any maintenance for that road, I would imagine.
Right. So
I'm getting a nod from the solicitor. That's
okay.
Good. That's reassuring. The other point, Chairman, if I could just highlight, the application has been subject, as is set out in page 58, 59, the application has been subject of a viability assessment to effectively determine how much it can afford to pay in terms of Section 106 contributions. Typical ones that we collect for are health, affordable housing, education, sometimes highways where appropriate. In this instance, Chairman, the viability statement submitted with the application has been assessed by an independent assessor engaged by the council, and the confirmation of that is that the development cannot sustain all of the level of contributions that would be required. However, Chairman, there is an offer of £226,700 for off-site affordable housing contribution, and a request from the Nottingham University Trust, which the applicant has agreed to, for a further £13,818. Your officers don't consider that there is a need to seek further contributions or that the permission should be necessarily refused on the basis that the development is not mitigating potential impacts such as health and the like. Chairman, this issue of the pavement is clearly a very sensitive one. I'm looking at another photograph, same photograph that's on the screen at the moment. The suggestion has been made by residents and the ward councillor that it's compacted gravel. You can see the picture yourself. To me, it does look like a bound surface running down that road. Unfortunately, the Google streetcar doesn't go down there, presumably because it's a private road. Ultimately, Chairman, it's a matter, clearly the developer considers that the access is suitable for buggies and the like. I don't think really, Chairman, it is a significant issue. It's a private road. We've talked about that at some length, and I don't know that in itself, in my view, is a matter that carries significant weight in determining the application. In terms of, Chairman, in terms of the impact on Hunter's Cottage, let's just look at that as well. So you can see this is Hunter's Cottage here. There is a proposal for some parking spaces here. a buggy store there and a plant room there. You'll see that there are conditions seeking final details of those buildings. There is also a condition requiring details, excuse me, details of the plants that would go in the plant room. It's a ground source heat pump, which would provide a sustainable form of heat to the property. But clearly, I was concerned that we need more details about that equipment so as not to cause noise or vibration disturbance to the neighbouring property, and hence we have recommended a further condition. If we just go back to the photograph of that property, that is the property in question. So yes, there would be some parking along here. There is a high level window there. There's a further window up there. Clearly, Chairman, your officers have considered the impacts on this property. We didn't deem it to be unacceptable. That is a matter clearly which is open to members to consider as the decision makers on this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Peckham. I think that picks those points up. Who else would like to come in on this one, please? Councillor Brennan was the first on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In many respects, I really welcome this application, because we know there's a huge demand for this kind of accommodation nationally and particularly across Rushcliffe. And the more that we can do to help elderly residents stay independent and stay in their own homes is a huge saving of the burden on the taxpayer for as long as possible. And I think we all recognise there's a huge need for it, and this looks to me like a quality development that would go a long way to providing that kind of accommodation for the elderly residents of the borough. It's also on a brownfield site that appears to have no intrinsic merit itself other than scrubland, and therefore is exactly the kind of place that we would want to see developments. However, it is in a conservation area, and it is, or does appear to be, a very large building. And whilst looking at comparison with the first approved development that has now lapsed and the second, in terms of the design, it seems to me a huge improvement and much more in keeping with the area, other than its mass. And I would like to know, if we can clarify, it may be rather arbitrary, but is it taller than the church steeple? Because the height of the church steeple is a kind of totemic measure for the sense of feeling of space within a conservation area and community. And so for me, I would like to approve this application, but I am concerned that the height is out of character and out of keeping, and I'm not clear why it needed to go, other than from purely aesthetic design purposes, it needed to go from 2.5 to 3 stories in such a sensitive area.
Right. So you're worried about the fact that not just people who are very near it, on, for example, Manor Park, will have the building in front of them, so by that nature, from that position, will be higher than the church steeple, but you're concerned in general, perhaps people looking from a further distance towards the Ruddington and the church, and so we want clarification on whether it would be visible from further afield as well from Manor Park. Can we advise on that?
Chairman, I think Councillor Gaunt's itching to come back in, but the protocols don't allow that. I think I can address the point. You might nod to this. If I just bear with me, Chairman.
No, I'm sorry, we can't. We're Please don't disrespect the committee. The committee is very aware that any planning application will gather people who are in favour of it or against. That's life, that's natural, and we are very aware of the facts, the arguments for and against. So please believe me on that.
Chairman, I think Councillor Gaunt actually referred to the height of the building in relation to the roof of the church, not the spire itself. I did try and Google this afternoon to find out the height of the spire. It was unsuccessful. I take this with a bit of a pinch of salt, Chairman, because I'm not sure if the church has been surveyed necessarily. You can see an indication of the height of the spire, and clearly the building does not exceed the height of the spire. The other aspect is, John, I think that my interpretation of this plan is that as a dotted line of the roofscape of the church. And yes, there is some indication there that this may be a little bit higher than the church. However, Chairman, I think what you have to have regard for is the distance between the site and the church. and intervening trees and natural growth. It's not necessarily a clear view through between the two buildings. And as you saw in the comments from the Conservation Officer, he has considered the impact on the church as a listed building and was satisfied that this proposal would not cause harm to that's the setting of the church. Chairman, the previous scheme, just to reiterate, was 3-storey. You saw in the images I showed you, it was 3-storey, albeit with a flat roof. The additional height that's added through this development is through the change in design to a more traditional design with a pitched roof. Clearly a matter members must judge in their, as decision makers on the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Pegram. My next name on the list here is Councillor Goland, please.
I want to basically echo everything Councillor Brennan said. I wonder if we can just make a condition to drop the height of the roof, because this seems to be a major issue. If the picture we saw just a moment ago that you zoomed out on indicates that with the new roof height, it really is very large compared not only to the height of the church but to the neighbouring buildings, and if it could be brought back down, retaining the sympathetic design so that the top floor was within the roof space, that would probably alleviate a lot of the neighbours' concerns and the impact on the neighbouring environment. It does just seem a very large building compared to the neighbouring landscape there.
Okay, thank you. Well, you can't put a condition in to alter an application because the planning application is what we've got. And what we have to do tonight is make a decision, yay or nay, for or against the application that's in front of us. Now, so that's the situation. You can't change it. But I understand what you're saying. But the way it works is you can't put a condition in to change it. You either approve something or you don't approve something. And the way life works is if something is not approved, then that's it. And then start all over again at some point, possibly. I hope that helps. I hope that clarifies. Did you want to add anything to that?
Chairman.
No. Councillor Major, please. Sorry, are you just coming in to clarify something? Because I had got a name before you on the list. So, Councillor Begum, then Councillor Major, please.
I just want to know that has the developer worked with the residents? Because obviously they've got a lot of concerns, and my concern is that the residents, they've got some important points that they've made, but the developers need to really work closely with the residents, because otherwise we won't be in this situation in the first place. So what's the situation there? Because I'm not
well, no, that's a good question, and my understanding from the various reports and letters and reports that we've received would suggest that the developer has been working or in discussion with the residents, but as we heard from the representative of the Residents Association, they don't necessarily agree that was perhaps as comprehensive as one would like. I think it's fair to say.
Okay, thank you for that.
Chairman, I can delve through the file and maybe be able to find something for you in just a moment on that issue. However, in terms of the legal position, whilst we encourage developers to engage with the community before submitting a planning application, the only type of development where such engagement is compulsory, obligatory, call it what you like, is for development involving wind turbines. So although there seems to be a bit of a debate about or dispute about the level of engagement that's taken part on both sides, that is not a reason to refuse permission or a material consideration necessarily. Something we encourage, but we can't insist on.
Thank you. Now, yes, Councillor Major, please.
So in that diagram, there are a few larger trees. I think there's one that's going to be preserved, the sycamore. I just wanted to get a sense of, is that an accurate representation of the height of those trees? Are they going to be offering any coverage of the building and softening that sort of streetscape to a certain extent? And equally on the reverse side, it gives the impression that there is quite a lot of big trees around the rear of the area, certainly. And I'm just wondering if that is the sycamore at the front there, and if that's actually accurate in terms of the size of that tree.
Chairman, it's difficult for me to answer that question. There are a number of trees which would be removed as a result of the development. The site has been inspected by the council's landscape officer. he had no significant concerns with the proposal, but you can see that there is a requirement for a landscaping scheme, and there is a requirement for engagement with our landscape officer as part of that process to reassess and check details in terms of the trees and everything in landscaping. So that is
paragraph 76.
covered by condition. Chairman, on the issue of engagement, there is, as part of the application, a document which is referred to as a, bear with me, got to the right page, a statement of engagement, which, as I say, it's not a major issue because, as I said, it's not an obligatory requirement, but there is an indication that there has been some engagement with the community. The level of engagement is clearly a matter for debate between the parties. Some feel not great. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So, Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of clarification, perhaps, more than anything else. 43 residents, 21 parking spaces. I also note that there isn't a commitment to installing broadband. It has been suggested, certainly as a borough council and I think Nottinghamshire County Council as well. As we go forward, we hopefully, certainly we're encouraging the installation of broadband, and I would hope at some stage we will insist in the new developments it becomes part and parcel of that. But in this case, there is a suggestion that the developer should, prior to development, contact one or two suppliers. I would hope, and perhaps forgive me for putting it like this, but I would hope the suggestion here isn't that, well, do our senior citizens, mature residents, perhaps not require broadband? Do they not require a car parking space? And I would also ask that perhaps within development that, there is an electric car charging point. They're all things that we want to see installed as we move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. So, right, parking for residents and allowing for the fact that there's considerably more residents than there are apparent car parking spaces. Broadband, do we know about broadband and electric charging points? I don't know whether we know about that, so, or even possibly conditions.
Chairman, we have conditioned such matters on what I would term conventional housing developments, housing estates. Just to pick up on the parking issue first, we've referred to this previously. The application was accompanied by a transport assessment. That transport assessment assesses this development against a similar type of development and concludes that a lesser parking level can be sustained due to the nature and nature of the development and the age of the future occupants. That assessment has been assessed by the Highway Authority, and the Highway Authority have not raised any objection to the level of parking that is being proposed. The issue of broadband, Chairman, we do deal with that in a condition, in an informative note to the applicant on page 65. Chairman, the issue about conditions have to meet the 6 tests, which include they have to be necessary, reasonable, relevant and enforceable. Chairman, I don't believe necessarily, so effectively if you're putting a condition on, it's addressing some impact to the development. We didn't consider such a condition in this instance to be necessary to make the development acceptable, and therefore we were not proposing a condition of that nature, either for electric charging points or for broadband. Thank you, Chairman.
But we do make a note to the applicant that they might be advised to liaise with the broadband providers.
Correct, Chairman.
Right, okay. Does that help, Councillor Healy? Okay, thank you. Councillor Verdi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Acknowledging that every application that comes to this committee is considered on its own merits, and there is a detailed appraisal here clearly in terms of this particular application. I have a point of clarification more than anything else that I'd like from our borough solicitor, and that is drawing your attention to page 48, paragraph 18 from our conservation officer, the proposal is for a building of a very similar size, footprint and height to that previously approved. Now, the question is, for me, as I said, acknowledging that we consider each application that sits in front of us, but what, if any, weighting would our borough solicitor consider to be relevant in terms of making a decision on this sort of an application when it is so similar in content? I appreciate all the comments and the considerations we've already had in terms of the differences proposed to us in terms of the current planning application, but what weighting, if any, should be applied, and are we in danger of being in contradiction of our own planning policies and regulations in terms of decisions that we may previously have made and that which we make this evening?
Mrs. Soul, can you help on that, please?
Thank you. Just to reiterate what Mr. Pegram has said, this application that's before you is to be considered on the basis of the application that's before you. Of course, there was a previous application, but that permission has lapsed, but it was given permission. But in terms of weighting, the committee decision today is based on the application that's in front of them.
Right. Did anyone else want... Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Goland.
I'll be honest, I'm quite confused about what we can and can't make conditions on, but I'm sure in previous cases we have made a condition for electric charging points, and I can't quite understand why that's not possible this time.
Electric charging points again. Can we, at this stage, put a...
Chairman, members can consider additional conditions if they wish. I can advise on the relevance of additional conditions and whether I believe they meet the tests. Another factor, Chairman, you will have noted on last agenda, we adopted a little bit of a more flexible approach because we, in that particular instance, we were not necessarily saying thou must. We were asking for a scheme to be submitted, and if it was not feasible, technically feasible, to provide the justification as to why it was not technically feasible. As I say, if members are of a mind that they wish to see some electric charging points, that is within their gift as the decision maker. It's not one that I'm going to lose sleep over as such, but I would suggest if we do put any condition on of that nature, it's the one that basically asks for a scheme to be submitted, and if it's not technically feasible, why it's not technically feasible to do it.
So that's a long way of saying, yes, you can if you are so minded. Did you want to come back on that, or is that helpful for you?
I am so minded.
Keep that thought on your mind then. Councillor Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the above diagram on the slide that's currently in front of us, is the development the only one that is on raised land that's like kind of highlighted in the green? Because all the other buildings that are around it all show that they're on a lower level, or is it just to give a height of the actual development against others if they're all on the same level playing field, kind of?
Chairman, the answer to that one is certainly in terms of the immediate neighbours. Here comes the pointer. The immediate neighbours here are, as far as I understand it, at road level. There is a change in level into the site, which is probably, if I get my pointer back, best illustrated by this picture, which shows the a ramp down towards the road, and also, well, you can see that one's not probably the best one. That one shows you again, as I said, these windows here serve ground floor accommodation. So yes, the site is raised up in relation to the road and the immediate neighbours.
So again, it's the level of the land, it slopes. So yeah, does that help?
It does, thank you. It was just that was just like giving the impression that everything was kind of on the, where we were just talking about the immediate, but it has been noted about the impact further afield rather than just the adjacent buildings.
Okay,
Thank you.
Right. Councillor Thomas, please.
It was just a fairly minor point, Chair, but one that was raised by one of the resident objections, and that is the unsightliness of the electrical substation at the front of the site. And I was wondering if it might be appropriate to have conditions to ensure that is screened by vegetation. Thank you.
Screening of this potential substation.
Chairman, I take it that's the building that Councillor Thomas is referring to. Yeah, that's the building referred to. I would imagine for maintenance purposes it needs to be accessible, needs to be close to the parking area. It is set back into the site, would be screened to some extent by anything that's across the front. Clearly you would get views of it, glimpses through the access. There's not a lot of opportunity, in fairness, to landscape around that without the loss of further parking.
I've already suggested that we perhaps have a condition to remodel the parking in that area, so it might be possible to take in both things.
Well, you know what I'm going to say now, don't you? Once again, as we had with the other point, you can't put conditions in to change an application. We have an application in front of us with all sorts of points on, which has been submitted, and we have to approve or refuse the application that's in front of us. We've heard that we can put some conditions on with regards to and suggestions with regards to things like investigating electric car charging points and so on. But you can't go into detail about changing the actual application itself as a condition, and which I think hopefully we all understand that. Councillor Purdue-Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got great sympathy with some of the comments and remarks made by the Residents Association and Councillor Gaunt. But I'm struggling with this application because it's a brownfield site. I'm pretty much where Councillor Brennan is on this, perhaps. And I personally, I don't think there is enough for us to bite on to withstand an appeal. And I'm also concerned, I think it's been a very comprehensive report and very useful information to us, and I'm particularly concerned with the comments around the viability of this scheme. And I think actually our officers have negotiated probably very near as much as we could get out of this particular scheme, and I'm happy to support Councillor Golan's suggestion on charging points as a condition. But this particular one comes down to an on-balance argument, I think. And I just feel that this particular scheme will have benefits for Ruddington, as well as compromises we have to accept. And I'm very aware of the issues in Ruddington over the last couple of years, and I believe that there will be benefits from this group of potential residents that we know there is a tremendous demand in, if you like, in the demographic marketplace. So, with reluctance, perhaps not quite that far, but I am prepared to move the recommendation as set out in the report, and I'm happy to, as I said, add on Councillor Golan's request for charging points.
Right, thank you, Councillor Purdue-Horan. So at this stage, I've got Councillor Golan who wants to speak again, but at this stage, do you have a seconder for your proposal, recommendation? Councillor Verdi, you're seconding that, are you? Righty-ho, so we've got a note of that. Councillor Golan.
A point that's just really come to my mind, and I've checked the documentation. I can only see a report from the Drainage Board who've basically said it's not their area. Just the elevation of that site with respect to the property behind it, is there any risk of flooding onto their land?
Reference to drainage on page 58, paragraph 81. The residents have raised concerns about the drainage on the site, but that's more of a building control, or is...
Chairman, the issue there really is we're not in a flood zone, which would be we would seek advice from the Environment Agency on. Clearly, matters of surface water drainage would normally be dealt with by the lead local flood authority, i.e. the county council. Just checking through, if I may, while we're on this. Sorry, Chairman.
That's okay. We're just checking some information on here. Yeah. While you're doing that, shall I bring Councillor Thomas in?
By all means.
Yes, Councillor Thomas.
I'm just wondering, by way of an amendment to the proposal, whether there is some way of bringing in the issue of pedestrian access or access for the residents, pedestrian and mobility scooter access for the residents to the village centre and the village facilities. Thank you.
So you're thinking rather like the electric charging point, whether they can bring a proposal.
Requirement for them to discuss it with officers, perhaps.
Yes.
Chairman, on the issue, lead local flood authority have not commented on this application. I'm just checking the conditions as well. I mean, largely what you said, yes, potential for flooding from surface water drainage is a material planning consideration. However, the matter would also be dealt with under building regulations to ensure that there is sufficient means of drainage for disposal of surface water and foul sewage. So the matter would be addressed. Clearly, we're not necessarily in an area where there is a high risk of surface water flooding, hence the lack of comment presumably from the lead local flood authority chairman. And the other point was about the...
Can we add another into the conditions, rather like the asking for a scheme for potential car charging points? Can we have a scheme or proposals for ensuring safe passage, safe access from the site for pedestrians and wheelchair users into the village? We're just taking advice on that.
Chairman, just confirming my thoughts with the Borough Solicitor. Clearly it's a different issue. The car charging points are within the site. We can control what's within the red line. It's a different issue totally to the sort of access back into the village. As I say, the Highway Authority have not deemed that necessary, but it is a private road, hence there's no sort of Highway Authority control over it.
Would it be possible to suggest to the applicant they engage in negotiation and discussion with the Residents Association, for example? Could something like that?
Chairman, the applicant's agent is in the room and has heard what you have said. My understanding is probably they would have to anyway because it's a private road, so there's got to be some level of engagement one would have expected. Because it's a private road, they are part of the residents of that, or yes, potentially part of the residents of that road.
So they are, yes. So they are neighbours, or they may be neighbours, and therefore they need to be part of the group who they will be automatically.
Well, I would assume, Chairman, it's obviously an area outside planning.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I think we've had quite a long discussion on this. I think we started at just gone 7 o'clock, so it's now coming up to 8:30. So it's quite a long discussion. It doesn't have time to go quickly, but it's a very important matter. This very important, and there's a lot of strong feelings either way. But we've had a proposal and seconder for the recommendation as shown, along with
Electric car charging
the electric
points.
car
Can I
charging
also
points.
check,
Yes.
Chairman, at the beginning I made reference to tweaking condition 3 to relate to persons over the age of 60, not
Oh yes,
yeah?
yes, you did refer to
Does
that, tweaking the
proposal
age.
and seconder
The
agree to that?
proposers and seconders, are you happy with that amendment regarding the tweaking of the ages of potential residents? Right. Does anyone else want to say anything, or shall we make a decision? I think we better make a decision. It's a detailed application and it is complex. I think we have covered all the points that have been raised by members, but also our guests, our speakers, both who are in favour and against the application. We need to make a decision, so we'll do it in the old time-honoured way of show of hands. We've got the recommendation shown on page 60 with the additions and amendments as discussed. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour of the application as shown? Please show your hands. How many is that? 6 and 8. Is that 8? 8. Do we have anyone against? 2, 3. Right, so, and there's just to confirm, no abstentions. Not that you would abstain usually on a planning application, but no abstentions. Right, so that means permission is granted as per the report, but also with the additional recommendations and advisory note to the applicant. Okay? Thank you.
Spend more time talking about electric car charging and the safety of children. Conservation areas, which is
Thank you. Thank you. We. Thank you.
we'll be picking you up on the departing conservation area.
Right. Are you asking for a comfort break? We'll have a. It's 8:30ish now. 8:30. Shall we have a 5-minute comfort break? Thank you. Right, we'll go on to our next application. Hopefully we've got our spine back. The next application is, and can I just say, is I know that some members are new, but we all know that the planning committee is here to make difficult decisions, as all councillors are, and it's inevitable. Sometimes you will make a decision that some people like and some people don't. But I think we covered all the material planning facts on that application, uncomfortable as it was. But I absolutely understand objectors' emotions. I absolutely understand that, but we have to follow the book. Right, our next application, 52 Mill Drive, Bingham. The proposed change of use from garden room to a dog grooming salon. What a variety of applications we have, don't we?
Something for you to get your claws into, Chairman. Sorry. 52 Hill Drive.
We'll chew it over.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll move on quickly. 52 Hill Drive in Bingham is the property which is outlined on the screen in front of you. It's a roughly triangular shaped plot. Property is an end of terrace property at the end of that run of properties. Aerial photography just confirming that layout and the rough dimensions of the site, or the rough area of the site. This is the property in question before you. Say end of terrace property. The building that is the subject to this application is at the rear of the site. So you go through this door, down the side of the property, through here to this building. The building is roughly 4.5 metres wide, 2.4 metres deep, obviously cuts in at the back to the shape of the site. Proposal is for the use of that building as a dog grooming business. Now, clearly, Chairman, some businesses operate from home and it doesn't result in a material change of use. One of the indicators of whether a material change of use has occurred is if there are visiting members of the public, in this instance with their dogs. The proposal is to operate at a relatively low level. You will see that condition, excuse me, sorry, getting late. One of the conditions does limit it to, dog grooming business hereby should only take place within the outbuilding, subject to the application, and we are limiting the operating hours of the business. And also that condition 4, there it is, Chairman, only one dog shall be attended to or held on site in association with the business at any one time. Chairman, given that relatively low level of activity, your officers are satisfied that this is a commercial use that can take place within this residential area without causing undue harm to the amenities of neighbouring properties or the area, and the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have any speakers on this application, so I think the reason this is a committee is because one of the ward member declared an interest, so it's pretty much a formality. So, does anyone wish to say anything on the application, or would anyone like to make a proposal? Perhaps Councillor Brennan.
I would like to make a comment, actually.
All right. Okay.
It is a small point, but I just want to be satisfied that the business owner, and particularly seeing the size of that building, is satisfied that they can run their business successfully with only one dog on the premises at the time. So, for example, if somebody came early to an appointment, would they be able to wait in the garden with their dog whilst the previous incumbent is dealt with and sent home? It's just being practical about running a small business. You don't want people standing on the street with their dog because you've got a planning condition that says they can't come around the back and wait while you finish with your previous client. It may seem small point, but if that were material to this person's business, that would be unfortunate.
Chairman, I think the point that Councillor Brennan raises is a very valid point. My own experience from taking my dog to a groomer's, which also operates from a residential property, not this one, I might add very quickly, is that yes, I take our dog in sometimes and they are tending to one dog and there's a cage in the corner where the dog that's in waiting sits and waits to be treated. However, Chairman, the suggested condition on page 72 has been discussed with the applicant. The applicant is content that that does not impose significant constraints on their business. Clearly, if the business proved to be more successful, they'd have to come back and vary that condition, and we'd have to consider the impact of that additional activity at that stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, if the applicant isn't concerned about it, then I'm not concerned about it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this one? Councillor Thomas?
Perhaps if Councillor Brennan and the applicant are not concerned, I shouldn't be, but we could just ask to remove the words "or held on site" from condition 4, which would, so it would then read only one dog shall be attended to in association with the business at any one time, so that might alleviate any future issues.
Chairman, you are the decision makers on the application. If you are concerned that the condition is overly restrictive, the only thing I would say is that if you are minded to amend the condition as has been suggested by Councillor Thomas, you do need to give regard to potential increase in activity that would give rise to. My own view is that that's probably not significant. So effectively, relating back to my own experience, is that you maybe have a cage in the corner that one would wait for while one's being tended, so you'd end up with 2 dogs on site at any one time. Over to you as decision makers, Chairman.
Right. Okay. Well, we've got that borne in mind. What does anyone else think to that? Does anyone else?
Bone in mind. Sorry.
Bone in mind. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor. Yes.
Yeah. I know several people in the area that actually have 2 dogs. And I know that they book them in separate times, you know, and they wait in their own residences actually a lot of the time, because they don't want grooming at the same time, because some of them are different breeds. So, you know, you can't account for every variation in the dog population, I don't think. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
Councillor Williams.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I can see the point that Councillor Thomas has made that we're trying to take it out to help alleviate a future potential issue. The only then kind of one is that where it's got attended to would then mean that you could have more than one up to any number being on site. And one want it to turn into a kennel or anything like that. I'm not saying that it will, but it's just that kind of openness on it of how many dogs would then potentially be on site at any one time and the capacity to keep X amount of dogs on site. So maybe that's why the resident didn't have an issue, that's all I can think of. Thank you.
Well, sorry, yes, Mr. Pegram. Yeah.
Chairman, one suggestion, Councillor Williams raises a valid point. I think as I said earlier, conditions have to satisfy the tests. One of those is that it has to be precise. If members were minded to take on board Councillor Thomas's suggestion, my suggestion would be it should be only one attending or one waiting attending, or whatever wording we would come up with to deal with that issue. It does come back to a matter of enforceability, yes, but clearly if there were loads of dogs on the site howling their heads off, no doubt we would get a call from somebody and we'd have to investigate at that point. But I think there is potential, as I say, you do get the scenario where maybe one dog takes longer to tend to than was perhaps thought. You might end up with another one arriving. If members are minded to give that flexibility, my own view is that would still not give rise to a level of activity that would be unacceptable necessarily.
Gosh, it gets complicated, doesn't it? Councillor Golan.
I'd like to move that we accept this planning application.
I think that's a very sensible suggestion. Do you have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Begum, and are you wanting to make any changes to the conditions or as per the report?
As per the suggestion from Mr. Pegram just now.
Thank you. Have you got that? Are you happy with that, Councillor Thomas? You are good. Right. Would anyone else want to speak? And thank you, Councillor Williams, for that. Just making a rapid note here, aren't we?
Hang on.
Yes. Okay. So let's. Councillor Verdi.
Just a minor point. If we are changing the condition, Mr. Chairman, paragraph 20 on page 71, I'm assuming that will have to be altered accordingly in midway down the paragraph where it refers to the size of the outbuilding would be self-regulating in this regard and not allow for more than one person and one dog. So I think for completeness, I'm not sure if our planning officer, Mr. Pegram, agrees with that or not, or what the precedence is, but would we normally change the appraisal if we're changing that condition?
Chairman, we wouldn't change the appraisal. That's the views of the Environmental Health Officer, and to some extent I don't disagree with his comment. Yes, the building clearly would only accommodate a certain number of dogs. I have seen an internal photograph of the building. In my view, and relating to my own personal experience, there is room for perhaps one cage in the corner to accommodate a dog. It depends on the size of the dog as well, of course. But I think the comment from the Environmental Health Officer is sound, because the building is, as I say, of the size which would self-regulate the activity, and I think we say that it should only take place within the outbuilding, the subject of the application. So they can't have dogs running around in the garden. Any dogs on site have to be in that building. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, good, right.
Unless they're their own dogs, I might add. Sorry.
Yes. Okay, right. Resist the temptation to ask who let the dogs out. Who let the anyway, we'll let's make a decision. I mean, does anyone really want to make a point on this, or shall we go to a vote? Because I can feel my spine going already. So, can I have a show of hands? In favour of the recommendation, along with the notes that we've just made. Please show. That's unanimous. Just to confirm, no one against, and no abstentions. So that is permission granted. And Councillor Purdue-Horan can come back and sit, and Councillor Brennan is now moving over there because it's a local application. And so we come on to our final application tonight, which is 36 Orford Avenue, Radcliffe-on-Trent. Single-storey rear extension, new pitch roof over the existing garage and porch.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, application relates to 26 Orford Avenue. It's, sorry.
36.
Correction.
Yes. Well, that's a
that's why I've made, yes, it is 36.
It's definitely
Just correction,
36.
It's 36 in the report. The application site is the one which is outlined in red on the screen before you. Lost my clicker. That's, again, the aerial photograph showing the real-life version. This is the property in question. You can see that it has, on the front elevation, a porch, garage running down the side of the property with a flat roof. That's the rear of the property, again showing that flat roofed garage there, existing conservatory. That's looking towards the neighbouring property to the southeast. That's looking at the bungalow uphill number 30, or towards, sorry, not uphill, northwest, number 34. That's looking down the rear garden at the properties to the rear. And then the application which is before you this evening, Chairman, is for a single-storey extension to the rear of the garage, projecting approximately 7.7 metres from this elevation. The proposal is for basically that's the existing layout, existing elevations, and the proposal is for a room with an ensuite facility, patio doors leading out onto the garden. The extension would have a pitched roof. That pitched roof would continue as a mono pitch across the garage, around the front of the building, therefore providing a degree of improvement to the aesthetics. Clearly, Chairman, the main consideration in respect of this application relates to the impact of the additional elements on the neighbouring properties. Extension would be roughly to eaves level about 2.2 metres, which is approximately 20 centimetres higher than the that boundary fence that could be erected along the boundary. Officers have considered carefully the impact. We did make a request that there was consideration given to shortening the extension. However, Chairman, in its submitted form, it was not felt that the impacts would be so harmful as to justify refusal of permission. And on that basis, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have speakers on this application. We have two speakers. First of all, Mr. Evans, who is on behalf of the applicant. So, as you will have seen earlier on, you're up to 5 minutes. Pardon? And as soon as you start speaking, the clock will start counting.
I think we'll be less than 5 minutes. So, we're actually the proposals for the aging proprietor of the property to be cared for in his own home as he gets older, and it's been designed for wheelchair access in the future. The planner's comments was, I think they've actually addressed all the problems and objections for this application. It has come to light that there is a building at 34 which is very similar in design to this one we're proposing, but actually longer by a further 2 metres. So we think that whilst there's a precedent been set at 34 for this application, and in fact actually the sunlight starts from the southwest, comes across, so there'll be no impact and no reduction of light to number 38 who are objecting. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Well within the 5 minutes there, but very clear. Thank you. So, just explaining about the similarity and other extensions on nearby properties. Our other speaker on this one is Sue Clegg from the Radcliffe-on-Trent Parish Council. Hello.
Good afternoon, good evening, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for letting us put our thoughts forward. Radcliffe-on-Trent Parish Council upholds its decision as consultees to object to this application for a rear and side extension on the grounds of being over-intensive and overbearing or shadowing. Other criteria mentioned in the written objections made by our 3 borough councillors are the size, the scale, the height, the length of the proposed extension, and an over-intensive size for the size of the curtilage. This extension projects some 8 metres, or should I be old-fashioned and say 26 feet, and that approximately is 6 of these tables along here, just to give you some idea of the distance. And this is from the present back corner of the existing garage, doubling the length of the wall on this elevation. The new monopitch roof along this whole side will be approximately 54 feet and the height of 5'10" or 10'5" or 3.23 metres. Got rid of the nose. The case officer states that the dwelling sits on an ample sized plot, slightly larger, note, than its immediate neighbour. This could be the crux of the matter, in our opinion, where the individual application, in isolation, has space. Its neighbour is a smaller plot with a smaller house, is overburdened by the length and the height of the proposed extension. It is stated that outbuildings were previously present, a wooden flat-roof garden shed and a greenhouse. Also, fence heights were quoted at 2 metres, not the 6 foot, and that I understand they are. Neither of these structures could compare with the solid structure proposed, either in length, density or height. Once again quoting the case officer, Policy 1 of Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 1, Policy 10, of particular relevance to this application are 2B, whereby the proposal should be assessed in terms of its impacts on neighbouring amenity, and 2F, in terms of its massing, scale and proportion. Local Plan Part 2 mentions extensions, that they should not lead to an over-intensive form of development, be overbearing in relation to neighbouring properties, nor lead to undue overshadowing. I refer back to my comments regarding the varied size of plots and houses in this area of Radcliffe, and although this large extension could be justified when considered in its isolation, please bear in mind that this 8 metres or 26 feet length will cover more than half the back garden boundary between number 36 and number 38, the smaller plot. It was felt that this application could not be supported and a unanimous decision to object was made by the Parish Council. We thank you for your consideration of our concerns. Of the houses of the same basic plan as number 36 in this area, many have been extended very well and very practically. I, for one, did the same to mine. And they've been made so. But personally, I feel there are other ways to achieve the requirements of the applicant. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mrs. Clegg. That's well within time and very, very clear. Thank you, and thank you to Mr. Evans as well. So Mr. Evans basically told us that the idea is to, in effect, future-proof the house and also make it suitable for possible ageing residents and wheelchair users. Mrs. Clegg confirms the Parish Council objects because they consider it over-intensive, overshadowing, and particularly on impact on neighbours. Points out it doubles the length of the wall, and she doesn't agree, or the Parish Council doesn't agree about the comment about it being an ample-sized plot. Do we want to pick up on any of those, please?
Briefly, Chairman. Mr. Evans mentioned that there was a similar extension elsewhere in the area and therefore set a precedent. Clearly, my advice to members is that each case has to be considered on its merits, and it's not necessarily where you wouldn't give significant weight to the presence of another extension elsewhere. It may have different impacts. The representative from the Parish Council spoke about height of fences. Chairman, the fence probably is, yes, 6 foot. The reference to the 2 metres was effectively a fallback position. So a householder is able to erect a fence on a side boundary up to 2 metres. The extension would only be about 20 centimetres higher than that 2 metres. That was the reference to fences. Obviously, Parish Council spoke about other ways of achieving the needs of the applicant. We've said it before this evening, Chairman, you must consider the application which is before you. In terms of the impact on the neighbour, north is, effectively, this is odd because it should be up the page, but north is that way. So this is north, this is south. So in terms of impact on this garden, it's considered to be lessened by the orientation and the path of the sun, which would obviously rise in the east, travel round to the west. So there may be, at certain times of the year when the sun is low in the sky, there may be some impact. In general, though, Chairman, it's not felt that any impacts would be excessive or unacceptable on that neighbouring property. In terms of whether it's over-intensive, Chairman, the development, if the development were to go ahead, the property would retain a private rear garden, so this is ignoring the front, but in the rear, of 214 square metres, which is well in excess of the recommended standard in the residential design guide. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. So, who would like to start off with this one, please? Councillor Thomas.
I just have a question. The 20 centimetres above the 2 metres, is that the height of the wall or the height of the top of the roof?
No. Effectively, Chairman, as I say, the fence, yes, maybe 6 foot at the moment, but permitted development would enable a 2 metre fence to be erected. That would place the eaves level approximately 20 centimetres. The ridge does rise higher, but obviously runs away from the boundary. So when the extension hits its highest point here, that's 2.4 metres, or the two of the extension, that's 2.4 metres away from the boundary. So therefore, again, the impact is lessened by the increasing distance. Thank you, Chairman.
That was a good question. I must admit I had the same query going through my mind. So that's helpful. Thank you for that. Right, Councillor Major.
Can I just check that? Is that a garage door? That's not glass bricks in it. That is a garage door on the front. Okay, just checking. Is that an existing? Okay. Yeah.
Retained as a garage in this scheme, Chairman, but clearly conversion of a garage is not development in itself. But in this proposal, it's to confirm the image shows a garage door.
Thank you. Right, okay, so anyone else wish to comment on this one, ask any questions, or would anyone like to make a recommendation of one way or the other? So, oh dear, it's a long night, a long day. Councillor Stockwood.
Yeah, well, I will propose the recommendation. I'm satisfied that the area of garden left is well above our recommended area of amenity, and yes, it is a very long extension, but I think it's acceptable in my view, so I'll propose it with no changes.
Thank you. So you're moving the recommendation
Yes.
as per the report. Do you have a seconder for that one, please? Councillor Thomas. Right. So do you wish to make any other comments on this? You're just happy? Well, you raised the point about you wanted clarification about how much of the extra height a neighbouring property would see, and I think we've got the answer on that. So. Right. Well, we've got the recommendation moved. Excuse me, moved and seconded. Does anyone else wish to say anything, or shall we go to a vote? Shall we have a show of hands then? Show of hands in favour of the application and recommendation as shown. Please show. Three, four, five, six. Yes. 8. How many is that? 1, 2, 8. Anyone against? 2. And any abstentions? No, so that's 8, was that
8-2.
8-2, that makes, yes, because we've got one less, of course we have, yes. So that means permission is granted as per the report, but thank you for your consideration both ways, so thank you on that. And then, finally, we come on to just, well, noting or if any questions on appeals. There's 2 appeals here that are reported on. There's the Stranglethorpe Road Cockgrave Crematorium and the land southwest of Nicker Hill, Keyworth, which was a new house in someone's garden, I seem to recall. Do you want to add anything to those? Or?
Not necessarily any questions, Chairman.
Any questions on those, anyone? No, righty-ho, so you're, yep. So, right, so that's the final item of the day. This is the final meeting before Christmas, so wish everybody a happy and peaceful Christmas. Tonight's meeting has been, as ever with planning, has been a little bit controversial at times, but that's the way it goes. And but I hope you feel that the meeting has been. We've come to decisions based on a lot of discussion and thought. I expect there will be some follow-up, some complaints or whatever about one of the applications, but I think we had made the decision based on all relevant planning material planning considerations. So with that, safe journey home, and we'll close the meeting at 9:05. Thank you.